RJ Harvey is a second round draft pick. And I told you so.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me, as he does every single week, is my good friend Andrew Gluco from The Last Word on Sports, expert on all things UCF. We're talking NFL draft, and we're going to talk about RJ Harvey. This is an RJ Harvey episode. We're going to talk about where he got drafted. Was it too high, and how did he do it? Let's start with where he got drafted. RJ Harvey got taken in the second round, Andrew. A reach, some are saying, for young RJ Harvey. Not in my mind, it wasn't, but certainly it was a great result for him in this draft. Now, there weren't a ton of running backs taken very high. Two in the first round, Ashton, Jenty, and Omarion, Hampton from North Carolina were the first two running backs off the board. After that, the pair from Ohio State, Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, went to the Browns and to the Patriots, respectively. And then our guy, RJ Harvey, with the 28th pick in the second round of the NFL draft. RJ Harvey is in the NFL. Now, I can tell you in talking to former players, one of the things they say about your draft position is that if you are taken in the first two rounds, it's kind of expected that you are going to be a starter or a significant contributor at least by year two of your career. So if you get taken in those top two rounds, they expect you to come along pretty quickly. They're investing quite a bit in you. Your initial reaction to RJ Harvey being taken in the second round and being the fifth running back off the board?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I was surprised to hear the call when it did. You know, if you look at the draft boards, he ranged between 90 and 110. So he was generally viewed as a third to mid third to really fourth round range, which is I thought he would have slipped further back because of his blocking issues. But what I didn't take into consideration, I'm willing to eat a little crow on this one. What I didn't take into consideration is we've seen this story before. We just didn't realize we've already seen it. Denver, drafted Javonte Williams just a handful of years ago in the second round, and it's basically who RJ Harvey is replacing. So, Williams moved on to Denver. They had a certain type of runner they're looking for, and Harvey checked all the boxes. He's a Joker type, runner. He doesn't have to be a great blocker, which is where he's most efficient. And here's the truth. You can fix that. You can't fix natural speed and instinct, which is what Harvey definitely brings to the table. So you let the NFL coaches, they may help him on his pass blocking, schemes and styles and techniques and whatnot. But they have high expectations. You already look at our lads, and they've already started putting in their depth charts for next year. They already got RJ Harvey slated as the starter, and that's going to be the expectation coming in, because you got a bunch of guys on this. Jaleel McLaughlin is probably out of a job at this point because he and Harvey are very similar, but Harvey's just a better runner. So you got him, Audric Estime. That's a good 1-2 punch. You got one is all about the speed and the vision, which is what RJ Harvey brings to the table. He's very low to the ground. He's kind of built like a wrecking ball, and he's able to avoid contact. Now, the funny part is you look at his yards after contact, and they're only okay. What makes Harvey so good is he avoids the contact in the first place. Yeah. And I think that's what Sean Payton was really turned on about is, this is a guy that knows how to avoid being hit, and not by any form of I'm afraid of being hit. He just has great vision and patience and will look for the right time to attack a gap or a hole to be able to avoid contact, get into the second level and do some serious damage. So the more that I've thought about this, I was like, you know what? Yeah, on paper, a little bit of a reach as far as the draft. But you know what? This isn't a vacuum. Every team has different needs and different styles. And he actually falls very much in line with what Sean Payton looks for in a running back.
Yeah, I've always just thought he had second round talent. Now, look, the only back in this draft that averaged a better yards per carry than RJ Harvey was Ashton Jenty. Ashton obviously averaged 7 yards per carry. Harvey, a ridiculous 6.8 yards per carry. Now, we all know Ashton Jenty had a season for the ages in terms of yards, but he also had over 150 more carries than RJ did, albeit on a playoff team. Now, of the backs in the top 10, Andrew, RJ Harvey in yards and total yards in the NCAA, RJ Harvey finished sixth, but he had the least amount of carries of those backs at 232 carries on the season. I think that it's remarkable what he was able to accomplish given the opportunities that he had to do it. He was effective when he had the ball in his hands. And certainly I think if you're an NFL team, you're looking at him, you're thinking, like you said, being able to avoid contact, like you said before, like, just avoid that initial contact and get upfield is something I think that is going to help him quite a bit at the NFL level.
Well, there's a few other things to consider. On the negative side, you look at his age, 24 years old, but this kid has a good head on his shoulders. He can slide in and handle the mental aspect of being the guy. The other thing is consistency. You look at his numbers over the years, and they were consistent. He had 1,400 yards in 2023 as the feature back. His numbers were not dissimilar between 24 and 23. Largely the yards were similar. The carries were similar. The yards after contact weren't too dissimilar either in the amount of missed tackles that he created. Obviously, Ashton Jenty is amazing at a whole different level of stuff. And that's why he was such a high first round pick. But it's, this is no poor man's pick. This was, a quality running back. And, we've seen years where running backs had ridiculously high values put on them. And then we've seen years where they've had ridiculously values. And you look at this year, the 2025 draft, running backs were viewed pretty highly. You had, Henderson and Judkins from Ohio State go early in the second round, and I thought those were reaches. You look at both of those guys, and I know you've been talking about online how winning makes a difference. Well, winning can make a difference. I think it actually helped out those two that they played off each other and not have to be the man where all the microscope is squarely on you. Whereas RJ Harvey, sure, he had a stable early on, but that stable kind of fell apart. And for a portion of the season, he had to be the guy, and eventually became a two-headed monster where you had RJ Harvey as the big dog and little puppy was Miles Montgomery. Originally it was meant to be the Four Horsemen stable, and it just didn't work out that way. But I think in spite of UCF season, they allowed RJ to continue to star, and he took advantage of the opportunities. And it comes back to what I was saying before about the ability to be patient, find a hole, find a gap. UCF their offensive line was much maligned over the last few seasons, and he still was able to find success. Again, that stuff that the NFL scouts look into. Sure, you may be on a bad team, but there are other stats and skills that they look for, not just what's written on a stat sheet. It's like, as we know, it is hard to evaluate offensive linemen, but how you evaluate offensive linemen can make a play as far as how you're going to evaluate a running back who is a product of the offensive line's ability to create run blocking. So yeah, it's a whole spider web of skills, attributes, and evaluations that will then eventually come back and say, okay, we like this guy because X, Y, Z, or we don't like him for whatever reasons. Look at Ollie Gordon. 2023, if he went to the draft, sky was the limit. He played in 24, did not go very well, and he absolutely tanked in the draft. He kind of got exposed, by Oklahoma State. Harvey took advantage of the situation and elevated up. So, I mean, again, it's, do I make the right decision to stay in school? Do I make the right, go to the draft early? Do I stay? In Gordon's case, it failed. And in Harvey's case, was very successful.
Yeah. Look, fascinating stuff. I think RJ Harvey, a second-round draft pick. Look, if you're Scott Frost, you didn't coach RJ Harvey, but certainly, it helps to have the name recognition from your program with having guys get drafted. Look, he's not going to be able to look back and say, I helped him get there. But you can get to the NFL from UCF, I think, is the message in recruiting if you're Scott Frost, right? Even in bad years, we had a second-round draft pick right here at UCF. So certainly I think there's a message there that that he can use that will be beneficial to his team long term. Was RJ truly drafted too high? This is something I want to talk about here right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bet if your first bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes it easy to bet, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props from three-pointers to steals to assists. FanDuel has so many ways for you to get involved. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine your live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. RJ Harvey, was he drafted too high? How much of a reach was it? Before we started recording, you gave your thoughts on this. You thought that it was a little bit of a reach. I think dogs are dogs, and I've been on this since midseason when we started talking about where he could potentially get drafted. I thought that the second round was a possibility. It has happened for RJ Harvey. Congratulations to him. I don't think we've said that yet. What an accomplishment for RJ.
I mean, you can't help but be proud of him. You don't, as talking heads, we may say one thing, but the truth is, you want nothing but success for whoever is out there. If you transfer, go make a good transfer. If, you go in the portal, whatever, go take care of yourself. If you get drafted, good luck. Unless you play for a team that I don't like, then I wish you only partial luck. I want you to do well. I want your team to stink. but the truth is, I mean, it doesn't, as me, I'm a UCF grad. I want all UCF players to do well, even if they're on a team I don't particularly like. I have no qualms about Denver. Maybe John Elway, but that's a whole, another thing, being from Cleveland in the 1980s. But I'm happy for him that the opportunity came. Here's true. I thought he was going to be drafted later. I thought the pass protection problems that he have, and it's pretty bad compared to a number of other running backs, would play a larger role in his draft stock. It did not. Again, NFL draft does not operate in a vacuum. It all depends on the circumstances. Denver needed a guy who can handle the starting load of as far as running the ball. Okay, RJ Harvey has proven that. And here's the thing about Harvey that even makes it more unique. He was a college quarterback in Virginia and then transferred to UCF and became a running back. So there's still things for him to learn. He's already 24 years old, which, some can look at as a negative. But you know what? That also means he's got a good head on his shoulders. He knows what he wants. He knows he's ready for it. He's learned to be humble. And those life lessons. I mean, he missed the 2021 season with a leg injury, and I think that actually helped him grow as a person and a player. A lot of times, you got to be knocked down a few pegs to be able to really come back even stronger. And that's not to say that Harvey wasn't a humble guy to begin with. He's always been kind of a talk quiet and carry a big stick kind of guy.
Yeah.
But I think that improved his focus on what do I want? How am I going to do it? Who do I want to be as a person and football player? And you saw the results the 3 subsequent years. So again, I'll eat a little crow and say, I thought he was going to be a later pick, but he had a good combine. He was in the top 10 for most every drill that he did. And he found a situation where a team needed what he brought to the table. And it was just a good marriage right there between a team in need and a player of a certain set of skills.
Yeah, look, the draft process is such a subjective business. And so what one person sees, another person doesn't. And, I think it's important for fans to remember that, look, there was somebody who looked at RJ Harvey and said, to some extent, he's a victim of his circumstance at UCF. UCF was not a very good offensive football team last year. I don't think that's a subjective statement. I think we can agree, objectively speaking, they were not very good offensively, especially in the passing aspect. That can lead to some setbacks for the player, particularly if you're a running back, right? When you get down situationally, I hear coaches say this in the post-game press conferences. We started out with the idea that we wanted to be balanced, but we got behind, Andrew. We got behind in the game, and we had to start throwing the ball around, and we abandoned the run, and maybe we should have leaned into it more, which leads to less carries for RJ. I think that's how he ends up with the least amount of carries of the backs in the top 10. If you give him 100 more carries, I think RJ Harvey runs for 2,000 yards. Personally, now
it's possible. Let me throw a little wrench into that.
Okay.
Part of the success is that he was able to come out and had other running backs in there. There were times where he was ineffective, and Miles Montgomery was able to be a good change of pace back. Second half starts and he goes off, or vice versa. Has a great first half and then just is ineffective in the second half. It does happen. So the fact that he had guys that could step in and take, can take some carries was not a bad thing. I thought it actually helped Harvey as a result. I don't know if his stats would be quite as high as if he carried it that much more. It does wear you down. There's that physical aspect, there's that possibility of injury. There's, again, sports is not in a vacuum. Would he have gotten closer? Absolutely, because carries and numbers, but would he have hit 2,000? I don't know if he would have hit 2,000 yards. He was definitely on pace for it, but I think his utilization was really good. And I think that was one area that UCF's offense actually did okay, was his utilization. I don't think they overutilized him. I don't think they underutilized him. The problem with UCF's offense was not the running game, I assure you.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can agree on that. Definitely was not the running game. Look, RJ Harvey is a special back. I think that will prove out at the NFL level, which is why he got taken in the second round. And look, all it takes is one person to see what nobody else sees sometimes for you to get that sort of break. And I can tell you, he got drafted in that area where I want to stress to our listeners, if you're listening to this on pod or on YouTube, that if you are taken in the first 2 rounds, there is an expectation that you will be a starter or a significant contributor by year 2 of your career. So there's high expectations that come with being taken that high in the draft. Certainly, RJ Harvey worked his butt off his entire life to be in a position to be one of the few, right? I think the NFL has just over 2,000 employees that are players. And so of the millions of high school football players that aspire to be pro one day, less than 1% actually become pros. So
was there an NCAA tournament? Well, was there an NCAA commercial based on that fact? Yeah. There's been like a whole handful of them over the years.
Yeah. Well, there's most of us will go pro in something other than sports. But we actually broke down the high school numbers to see what percentage, how many high school football players are there in America and what percentage of them are pro. Well, I mean, it's easy math to do because you know how many players are in the NFL. We have those numbers. And this is a dream come true for RJ Harvey, right? Like when you started playing football in middle school, this is the thing that everybody dreams about, is having their name called. in the NFL draft. Now, he didn't make day one, but certainly making day two behind the guys that got drafted in front of him, right? 4 guys, 2 of them on the same team. Ashton, Jenty, Omarion, Hampton, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. Those are the only guys that they thought were better than RJ Harvey. And I think that that's amazing. Now, are there other guys that could be better than him at the NFL level? Sure. And your team and circumstance, and there are a lot of things that go into, how long a career, he'll have at that level. But I think that RJ Harvey earned this. I think that he got this on merit. And I don't think it's a reach that he got drafted in the second round. I think this is what he earned. I think he worked his butt off his whole career, and it landed him in the second round of the NFL draft. So I can't wait to see what he does. I agree with you. It should be fun to watch him there with Sean Payton and see what they can do with him. But RJ Harvey, second round of the draft. Look, sometimes there's a correlation between team success and how many guys get drafted from your team. How did RJ Harvey overcome a 4-8 campaign by UCF to get drafted in the second round? Talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked on UCF is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, Andrew. Now, I know you are a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, are you not?
I am.
All right. Well, if I gave you Cleveland Cavaliers tickets to a playoff game, do you think you would go?
Means I'm booking a flight to head up.
Well, I can tell you, if I were giving you tickets, I would buy them at Game Time. Look, there's nothing like the NBA playoffs and the atmosphere. I don't know if you've been watching, but we've had some exciting NBA playoff games so far. And the Game Time makes it easy and fast to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high, which they certainly are on these playoffs. The prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer. So if you're local for some reason, you can score some really great deals on Game Time. Last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%, and they have all-in pricing, which means no surprises at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, low prices, guaranteed. What time is it?
Game Time.
4-8. A pitiful 4-8. That was UCF's season. Look, they had a couple guys off the board. In our next episode, we'll talk about the other guy who got drafted, but we're focused on RJ Harvey right now. Second round draft pick from a 4-8 team. An absolute mess of a season for Gus Malzahn. Ended in his resignation. Now Scott Frost is the coach. But how huge is it that he was able to overcome what was a disaster of a season? Because I mentioned he ran for over 1,500 yards, but UCF's offense was not good. They were particularly not very good in the red zone. They couldn't score in key moments. The amount of games this team could have won if they could have just gotten to 24 points, crazy. How big is it that he was able to overcome the team's failures to be a second round draft pick?
Well, it just shows how, one, the draft scouts, the scouts for these teams recognize what UCF's problem was, and it wasn't the running game. They were 5th in the country in yards per game, rushing at 248 yards a game. Running was not the problem, and they knew that. You had you had a rotating door of quarterbacks, and none of them were overly successful. Your best success came from a 4th stringer, and that's because no one knew who he was. Once the film came out, his numbers came back down to earth. So you had 4 quarterbacks. They were all generally ineffective outside of little pockets here and there. Against TCU, KJ Jefferson had a great game. Against Arizona, Dylan Risk had a great game, but not really much outside of that. The one thing you could count on for UCF's offense was the running game and how successful that was. And who was the focal point of that? RJ Harvey. So the numbers, they see it and okay, well, even despite a bad quarterback situation, where teams were keen on UCF running the ball, they still accumulated yards and could score points on the ground. So the fact that you have all these things working against you, this team still delivered results. And you had over 3,000, you had close to 3,000 yards rushing on the season, and half of that plus is from RJ Harvey.
Yep.
And so, do the math here. Then you have a good combine. They love the kid from a character standpoint. Obviously, as we talked about in the last segment, 24 years old, very good head on his shoulders. Humble, hungry. All the things that you want in a player. He checks off the box. I mean, you can make the argument that his age works against him, but you know what? Not necessarily, because that means, hey, he's ready. I can just throw him right in there and he'll know what to do. But, you look at the stats, they still delivered on the ground, and they know that teams were keen in on them. They watch the tape. They can see, 8 guys in the box easily, and UCF still running the ball and still moving the ball forward. That's a tribute to, utilizing the offensive line the right way, because UCF's offensive line was much maligned at times and had struggled against some teams to create explosiveness. They were able to utilize the running backs in ways to offset some of the weaknesses of the offensive line, which put more of the pressure on the running backs to use their vision, cutting ability, and strength to create opportunities of their own. And they delivered. Miles Montgomery delivered. RJ Harvey delivered. That's why they ended up being the top 2 running backs in the season, is because they were able to work with what was given to them and succeed. The other running backs, Johnny Richardson, he struggled at times, but he was, he's the small guy. He was very undersized. And then Penny Boone just kind of fell off the face of the earth. They did not, were not able to fully adapt to the situation, considering the suspect offensive line's blocking ability and whatnot. So, you're dealing with the NFL. You're expecting that you're going to have better offensive line ability, but the fact that he didn't have great offensive line ability just shows how good he really was at creating something out of nothing. And I again, that result is why he was drafted where he was.
Yeah, look, I'm telling you, players on winning teams get a little bit more attention than players on losing teams. I think we're going to agree on that. It's not an end-all, be-all, but certainly 4 and 8 cut off some opportunities, maybe for some of his teammates to get looked at as well, too. So, to be drafted in the second round on a 4 and 8 team, I think it really highlights how special a player he has a potential to be at the next level. Now, has he realized his full potential? Not quite. I don't think he's anywhere close to being where he could be, especially when they get in those NFL training programs. If he continues to carry himself like a professional and reach that next level, I think it's going to be fun to watch RJ Harvey's career progress. But look, this is not necessarily a win for Scott Frost, but I think it is kind of a win for UCF as a program to have another NFL alum here drafted so high and have the opportunity to go out and continue to carry the UCF name at the pro level. RJ Harvey is a second-round draft pick. I can't wait to talk about him on Sundays. I can't wait to talk to you tomorrow before we get out of here. Tell people where they can find you.
Well, before we go, it's worth noting that RJ Harvey being drafted at 60 in the second round is the highest running back ever for UCF. Kevin Smith was first pick in the third round. He kind of tweaked up. And as we've seen online, there are arguments of Kevin Smith versus RJ Harvey, who is the better running back. So
we talked about that on this show.
We have. Well, RJ Harvey gets to have a little bit of the last laugh on this part of it where you were drafted, because he got drafted first. Now we're going to see how that translates to his NFL career. We know Kevin Smith's got cut short as a result of injuries. I think he being run into the ground in 2007 played a heavy role into that. So there's a lot of opportunity for RJ Harvey to eclipse Smith as a whole in his, on the NFL side. It probably won't take very long, but we both have very high expectations for him. Where you can catch me online is on Twitter/X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew. And you can catch my work on The Last Word on College Football, part of the Last Word on Sports family.
That's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of every day. For your next listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.